This conference will now be recorded.
Welcome, everybody, and thanks so much for joining us. I'm Jody Collada with Wellspring Solutions. And as we continue to offer our virtual education programming, we're so pleased to be able to partner with Whichard, Roach and Associates on this four-part series for family caregivers called Fortify Your Finances. And before we start, I just want to share a little bit of information with you about Wellspring Solutions and how we might be a resource that you would benefit from, or maybe someone you know would benefit from the services we offer. So just briefly, we offer confidential and free memory screenings in the community. We are also licensed to offer the Memory Fitness Program out of UCLA. We are certified to offer the Dementia Dialogue Series out of USC. And we also offer home and community-based services to adults with dementia and their caregivers in Guilford County. And we do that with our specialized adult day programs, group respite, education, support, and home care. So the Memory Care Center is for individuals who are over 60 years old and have a diagnosis of dementia. And we offer activities to engage our members, creative expression with music and art, spiritual activities, movement. We offer breakfast and lunch and an afternoon snack. And we have staff to assist with personal care needs and a nurse who will also help with healthcare monitoring. We're open Monday through Friday from 7:30 until 5:30. Connections and Memory Club is an abbreviated day of socialization and engagement for seniors, again, who have dementia, but this is more in a small group setting. Lunch, music, exercise, and again, opportunities for engagement are offered, and we have 4 locations, 3 in Greensboro and 1 in High Point. And very importantly, these services offer our caregivers a much needed break from their caregiving responsibilities. We offer education sessions on a variety of different topics, really focusing on self-care strategies and direct care, like communication tips and safe body mechanics. And of course, financial and legal planning. And we also have caregiver support. Right now, we have 2 virtual support groups that meet on a monthly basis. We have our home care staff that is here to assist you. And if you do not know what services you would benefit from, you please contact our navigator, Nicole. She can do an assessment with you, come to your home, or talk with you on the phone at no charge, and just get a sense of what your caregiving situation and what services might best meet your needs. So if you have any questions about the services we offer, please give us a call or visit us on the web. And now it is with my pleasure to introduce to you our speaker. Bill Roach is the owner and president of Whichard, Roach and Associates and has served as a financial professional for over 30 years. Bill's an investment advisory representative with Gradient Advisors and holds his Series 65 license with FINRA. Bill's known for his sound, client-centric advice in retirement planning, wealth management, and estate planning, and loves coaching his clients as they align their portfolios to their values. So I will go ahead and turn it over to Bill, and thank you so much for sharing your time and your expertise with us this afternoon.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, Jody. Thank you for what Wellspring Solutions does in our community. This is a huge topic for us. As many of you know, some of you know the name Whichard, Roach and Associates, maybe from past dealings with my partner, Ernie Whichard. And back in 2012, Ernie and I put together this partnership, and this is why our heart is so close to this whole topic of long-term care and all of the different angles that this takes. But in 2013, Ernie had a massive stroke in February of 2013. And he had been in this career, the same career that I'm in, for about 35 to 40 years. And it took him out of the business altogether. So when he had this stroke, he was in a skilled nursing facility for about 5 months. But one thing that Ernie and his wife had done very well is they had planned for this day. They had planned financially for it. They didn't really plan emotionally for it because that's a hard thing to plan for, right? It's not something that just you just kind of think about and dwell on and can't wait till this day gets here. But when it does come, if you are ready financially, that can be a very big positive or a boost in the whole situation to know that things are taken care of. So over the last really 7 years, we've committed ourselves as a company to help the community with what we have to offer in terms of our knowledge, having gone down this road before, not only with my partner, but with many of our clients who have experienced Alzheimer's, dementia, other conditions that have basically caused them to need some level of care, whether it comes from a spouse, whether it comes from a child, whether it comes from a skilled facility, whether it comes from some type of assisted living or in-home health care. It's got a lot of different angles to it. So, not only was Ernie one that prompted us to look at this area so much harder and start devoting a lot of our time and attention to it, but we've also experienced it in my own family. I've seen my grandmother go through it. I've seen my wife's grandmother go through it, and every situation is different, which kind of leads me to this first part of our 4-part series on fortifying your finances. The question that we have out there that you're going to see is, why doesn't the usual financial advice seem to apply to us, particularly as caregivers? Caregivers are in a very unique situation. Every situation is different in some way, shape, or form. It's different financially, it's different emotionally, it may be different in terms of the level of care that this person needs, it could be different in the amount of care that that person needs. So every angle of it can be different, and no situation is exactly like the other situation, although, albeit, it's a very difficult situation, particularly for the caregiver who is having to basically put more time into an area maybe that they weren't prepared to get into. So we're going to spend some time focusing on that, and over the next several weeks, focus on some other questions that we're going to tackle as well as they relate to finances. But as Jody mentioned, we're going to open it up for questions. I'll open it up after each presentation that we do on each of these 4 weeks, but we'll also tackle more questions at the very end of it. The first thing I want to get into is really to talk about financial vulnerability. And I have to preface today's presentation by saying that the information that we're going to talk about is current, that I'm going to give to you as of today, September 22nd. We have to put this on a recording so that people who maybe view this presentation later down the road will understand that the information we're presenting today is as of September 22nd. So if you're watching this as a recorded webinar, just know that this was the date that it was recorded. So we're going to discuss each one of these areas about invulnerability. We're going to talk about living longer. We're going to talk about the increased healthcare costs. We're going to talk about fixed income or even decreased income that comes along with being in this position of a caregiver. We're going to talk about the more responsibilities that come along with that. And oftentimes, the inability to work because you're having to spend more and more time taking care of a loved one or maybe somebody that you're doing this for professionally. Either way, it's a unique situation in every situation, and it creates these areas of vulnerability. So we're going to talk about living longer first. This is some interesting statistics as it relates to life expectancy, and it's very important as it relates to finances. Back in 1965, you'll notice that the average female lived until she was about 74 years old. The average male lived until an average age of 67. Well, that has changed significantly over the last 50 years. A lot of this has to do with just healthcare changes, medications, and we're living longer. We're creating a longer life expectancy, partly by how we live our lives and because of modern medicine. But when we look at the numbers today, life expectancy for the average female is over 81 years old. The average male is now living to 76 years old. So in each instance, this is creating longevity, which requires a longer pull on assets to make things work. So life expectancy in and of itself, as it's gotten longer, creates some of its own issues, both positive and negative. We're living longer is a great thing in many ways, but at the same token, it's requiring us to do a lot better job of planning. And nowadays, we don't have as many companies that have pension plans. Most of us are having to save on our own through our 401k plans or IRAs or Roth IRAs. And and or maybe our investments, maybe we're buying real estate and things like this that are increasing our potential for income down the road. So it's a unique situation that we're faced while we're living longer. The second area of vulnerability is really the increasing healthcare costs. So, Carrie, we'll move this one forward. So by age 65, the average American spends 4 times more than the millennial on healthcare expenses. And this is a big number, because what this means is that if you couple this in conjunction with living longer and add to it that we're having increased healthcare costs, a lot come in this particular area here that we're talking about with long-term care. This is a big one because it's running ahead of inflation. It's not running behind it or even at it. So the cost of medication and treatment and things like that, they tend to go up every year. So as I start to get older and my expenses go up and I'm living longer, you can see where that can kind of be a double-edged sword there. So this next screen is going to talk a little bit about inflation. And this screen is really just showing that most Americans, as they get into retirement, are living off somewhat of a fixed income. Those fixed income sources oftentimes come in the form of Social Security, may come in the form of a pension plan. It may come in the form of taking RMDs off of your IRAs once you get to age what is now 72. Now it used to be 70 and a half, but that has now increased. But the point is that as inflation starts to creep up and my income starts to stay level and I'm living for an even longer period of time, we're creating a bigger problem as it relates to our own health care. So it's something that we have to plan for. Now, this diagram, too, I have to preface by saying this is just a hypothetical illustration to illustrate the inflationary cost of living getting higher while our fixed income stays at a level, really pretty much the same level for most of our retirement years. So our next slide around financial vulnerabilities is a very interesting slide as it relates to the additional dollars that are lost by those of you who are caring for somebody. So if you are caring for a loved one, this is a statistic that's been looking at it from 2009 to 2018, and they are estimating that the lost wages of children who are taking care of or trying to provide for a loved one, mainly a parent, that the lost wages equates to about $1.9 billion in lost earnings. Now, many of us would go, you know what, looking back on it, was worth it. I got to spend time with mom or I got to spend time with dad, but there is a financial impact on how that relates to us for those that are taking care of somebody whose needs are there. And oftentimes that means some type of financial adjustment on our own side, whether it's having given up work or maybe going from full-time to part-time. Either way, there can be an impact in there. And then there's a little trickle-down effect on the lost wages too. If I have to decrease my hours, then that also means that if I was contributing to a 401k plan at work, I've probably lost some of those contributions, which are really free money from an employer who's matching. Let's say my 401k plan matches 3% and I put in 3. Well, if my income has come down, then I'm getting a lower match and I'm putting less into my own 401k. So this is only an estimate, but I think it brings up a very good and solid point that there is lost earnings that can happen to anybody who's providing for somebody that needs care. So let's go forward to the next screen, Carrie. Coupled with this lost income, oftentimes comes with decreasing energy and health. It's harder to take care of yourself as you're taking care of somebody else, and you yourself are also aging. And so as you get older, and you can see by the graph here, if you're 60, there's a 20% chance that you're having some level of difficulty beyond age 60. But as you get older, like age 70 and into your age 80, the increased chance of the difficulty of doing some of your activities of daily living become greater. That's when the need becomes greater for more care. And so it's a graduated type step. Even if you're in a Alzheimer's or dementia type situation, there's a debilitating impact over a period of time. And typically as you get older, that is going to happen in our own situation where we are taking care of somebody, but at the same time, are we taking care of ourselves? And that's something that we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about. But, cleaning and cooking and doing yard work and things like that, all of those things tend to get a little bit harder when you're having to take care of somebody else and take care of yourself or your home, particularly if you're still raising children or are trying to do a lot all at one time. So some of the other things that folks like you will experience is that you're taking on more responsibility. We touched on this in the prior screen, but typically where maybe you are sharing responsibilities with somebody, like let's say you were a spouse caring for a spouse, and each of you had your own responsibilities. Maybe he did the yard work and paid the bills, and you did the cooking and the shopping and cleaning, what have you, whatever the scenario. Typically through life, there's a split there, and that split changes. If that one person is in a difficult situation and they no longer can take care of themselves, well, more than likely they can't take care of their responsibilities either. So now all that goes to the caregiver. And now you can see why this wearing down effect can be so detrimental to the person who's caring for their loved one. Albeit they may want to do this, it still can be a hard situation when you've got the full load now. You were doing half of it before, and now you're doing all of it. And again, sometimes that's a graduated process where you start doing a little bit more and a little bit more. So our next area we're going to talk about is guidelines to help others without hurting yourself. And that's kind of what I've been alluding to. So we're going to look at these areas here. We're going to talk about stress and emotionalism and too many expenses and too little income and diminished savings and how all of that can play in. So what we've seen from a cognitive standpoint is that people, when they're under stress, tend to react in ways that are maybe not their norm. When you take on a lot of stress, you start to think a little bit differently. They call it a stressful cognitive disconnect. And that's where you've taken on so much and you're trying to do so much that you yourself have trouble thinking things through. What do I need to do next? How do I stay organized? Feeling like you're getting a little bit like things are just out of control in your own life. And it can be challenging to try to think clearly under stress. So with so many difficult emotions, some of you will have experienced this. Next screen here, Carrie, let's scroll forward to some of the things that caregivers experience. All of these things, or some of these things, many of you may have experienced who are going through this very same situation. But we think it's important to say maybe when you want to say yes. Giving yourself time to say, okay, well, maybe I can do this. Let me have a little time to think about whether this is something that I can take on or not, particularly as the demands get greater and greater. Because there are other ways to help somebody who needs help, and it doesn't always have to be you 100% of the time. Some of us want to take that on. We have big hearts and we want to do everything we can, but at the same token, if we are struggling to take care of ourselves because we're taking on too much, we've got to step back and learn to say, again, maybe when we want to say yes, and sometimes we might need to say no to certain things. So very important as we're giving that level of care to make sure that we're caring for ourselves as well. I think it's one analogy that I like is that when you're on a plane and the oxygen gets low in the cabin and the oxygen comes down from the top, they always tell you to put your oxygen mask on first so that you can help somebody next to you, whether it's a child or somebody else that might be struggling. And I believe that the same theory and concept applies when you are a caregiver. You have to be willing to say, I got to take care of myself too, because when you get too far down that spectrum, it becomes difficult to handle any situation, and nobody wants that. And especially the person that you're caring for, they probably don't want that for you either. So not that I have a crystal ball with all the solutions and things like that on how you do that, but you do have to start thinking along those lines about how do I do a better job of taking care of myself while at the same time taking care of somebody else as well. So goal setting is the next thing that I think kind of dovetails into this a little bit. Goal setting is really is being realistic with yourself about how you envision the future for the situation and for yourself. What does a routine look like for you? How does it feel? Does it feel like you have space and you're giving yourself time to breathe and time to relax and just unwind a little bit? Or is it constantly stressed, 24/7, just feeling like the pressure is too much? And so sometimes we have to just digress and say, well, what does your good enough future look like in this situation? What does good enough look like? So that you are still a part of this person's life and helping them as best you can, but at the same time, making sure that the oxygen stays on yourself as well. So the part of goal setting is future budgeting. And this is a part where I think a good financial advisor can be helpful to anybody. Oftentimes, when you're in a situation that's somewhat stressful, it's hard to think through your own financial situation. What do I do to fortify my own finances? How do I budget? How do I, because things are constantly changing. That's the hardest thing about budgeting is how do I do this in the middle of this kind of storm that I'm in and still make sure that I'm taking care of finances, not just for the person I'm providing for, but also for myself as well. Because oftentimes this scenario will create additional expenses for you. It may create unnecessary expenditures that you didn't expect. It may create additional income, and we're going to talk about that in a second, but it could also create lost income. And we talked about that earlier, lost income from the standpoint of I was working full-time, now I'm working part-time, or I was working full-time, now I'm not working at all kind of thing. And in all of this, I think it's important not to forget about your own savings and providing for a cushion for yourself. Again, giving yourself some breathing room in your own financial situation and saying maybe when you want to say yes and saying no when you just can't do it. And oftentimes I think if you align yourself with a good person that you trust, whether it's an advisor or a family member who's good with money, things like that, oftentimes you can bring somebody else in to help you think through the things that you need to do for yourselves. So the last part on the financial health side is really evaluating your needs, your budget, your assets. Again, we're talking about you. We're not talking about the person you're providing for, but we're talking about evaluating your own needs, looking at your own budget, looking at the assets that you have available to you, whether it's land, whether it's a home, whether it's your 401k, whether it's just savings that you have that you've saved up. But as a rule of thumb, these are just a few of the things that I like to see for folks, regardless of whether you're caring for somebody or not. I like to see folks have 6 months of expenses in savings account. That way, if you did lose your job or you're having to cut back, you've got some money set aside for this day, getting ready for this day, and having 6 months of expenses will be extremely helpful to have that in savings. So that means if your expenses in your home run, say $4,000 per month, that you have 6 times $4,000 just in your savings account. I'm not talking about your stocks and bonds and IRAs and things like that. I'm talking about emergency fund money that you could get your hands on. It's down at the bank. It's not going to make much money, but that's okay. I'm not interested in making money off of my 6 months of expenses. I'm looking for liquidity and I'm looking for peace of mind. That's what I'm looking for in that. Adding 20% to your expenses is really just a thought process of, okay, if my expenses are this, giving yourself some upside cushion and saying, okay, if my expenses were $4,400 a month, it's adding another maybe $800 a month of unexpected stuff that may come through the situation that you're going through. And then the next step is really looking at liquidating an asset plan. That really involves taking a look at the things that you have and going, okay, here's my plan B, C, and D. Like if this drags out and it's a long time that we're going through this, then where are my next steps to go to? And again, having somebody in your corner that can help you kind of compile that and look at your situation realistically and go, okay, here's what you can do. That sometimes is the catalyst that helps you to determine whether your maybe needs to turn to a yes, and you can do this, or maybe your maybe needs to turn to a no. Again, it's getting some advice on that. And through the whole thing, staying flexible, so important because things do change. Sometimes they change daily. Sometimes it takes months before things change. Oftentimes they don't change for the better. And that's probably the gloomy part of all of this is that you're watching the situation become a little bit worse over a period of time. And you're starting to think, okay, how do we kind of hang in there? How do we manage this whole thing? The last area there is really not to forget about your own aging. We've talked about that. As you get older, it's going to become harder. It doesn't necessarily get easier. It's just part of the aging process for all of us. So we have provided some resources for all of you. Again, this is a 4-part series, but of the things that we talked about today, this page has all the resources. Some of the statistics and stuff that we talked about is out there for you to look up on your own if you'd like to kind of gather some more information on it. Lastly, I would just encourage you that, again, your situation is unique to you and to what you are going through. And while it's important to take care of yourself, it's also important to do everything you can for the person that you're providing for. And no doubt that person loves you, respects you, thanks you for what you're doing. Oftentimes it is probably the most difficult thing that you will do in your life is to have to do that. But on the tail end of this, having several clients have been through this before, you will look back on this and be thankful that you did go through this for that person. It's hard. Nothing's easy about it. Our role here, if anything, is to help you in any way that we can, or any advisor that has a good bit of knowledge in this area, to help you get through at least fortifying some of these areas so that you are prepared for this day yourself somewhere down the road. So with that, I'm going to close out our first session. If there are any questions, I'm available to answer questions. We will have our next meeting on September 29th, again at 2 p.m. We will have the next one after that in October, the first Tuesday in October. And then we're going to finish up on October 27th. So just note that there is a 3-week break between our third one and our fourth one. So with that, I'm going to stop there and say, Jody, if there's any questions that you've seen come in on chat that you'd like to ask.
You bet. First, I just want to say, at Wellspring Solutions and myself personally, we reiterate so very much the importance of self-care, and we think about that in like an emotional and a physical way. And I really think people sometimes forget that there's that financial self-care. You have to plan, you have to really think about yourself as you're aging, and I just think this was such valuable information. I don't have any questions via chat, but I have a question that was submitted, and I think it might resonate with those here. I'll go ahead and read that, if that's okay.
Sure.
Okay. I'm reaching a point in my life where I will be the one who needs caregiving, yet I've taken care of most of our household finances since that's what's worked best for my wife and I. What steps should we take to ensure that she can seamlessly, pick up that load when I'm unable to carry it later? And it really speaks to how you talked about that, breaking up of the responsibilities. So that I thought that was a good question.
Oh, it's a wonderful question. I'm glad somebody asked that question, because I think it's so important for both folks in a relationship to be involved in the finances, particularly as they get older. Because if you will involve that person just in a joint meeting, maybe where you're meeting with your financial advisor and you're starting to have these kind of conversations about what it's going to look like, and just being real with mortality. I mean, mortality is going to happen. It's going to be there someday. But the more the spouse is involved in the financial process and is involved with the advisor or broker, whoever they're working with, I think that brings them into the fold a little bit, if anything, just to give them some peace of mind that, oh, that's right, if something happens to my husband, here's who I need to call, right? And so as far as like just paying bills and things like that, well, that's something they have to work out pretty much on their own. Like, okay, here's what we have set up. Online banking is a wonderful thing if you have regular bills like a mortgage or power and lights, all that kind of stuff that comes along with paying bills, transitioning that over. But that's not really the bigger issues for a spouse. It's usually the whole money situation, and where do I go and what do I do and all that kind of stuff. We get more questions, and I encourage folks to do things like this together, like the webinar that we're doing today. Like, do that together. If there's anything surrounding money, an investment decision that has to be made, or what have you, just involve the spouse at some point in time. There's a statistic out there, Jody, that says that once a spouse dies, oftentimes it is the male who handles the finances, but when that male passes, 70% of those spouses who are living find another advisor than the one that he was working with. Oftentimes it's the country club buddy mentality, or hey, that's been my stockbroker forever, we went to college together kind of thing. And I don't mean to downplay that in any way, shape, or form, but it's a big statistic. 70% of those will leave that advisor and go to somebody else.
Yeah.
My point would be that person should be involved with the advisor. And so that's really my answer, is just making sure that you're including each other on anything that surrounds money, finances, long-term care, all of that. Start doing it together. And I think that both of you will be rewarded for that, because oftentimes there's a very different thought process from the male perspective to the female perspective on money. Risk tolerances oftentimes are very different. A risk tolerance is what level of risk is he willing to take versus what level of risk is she willing to take. And oftentimes that's different. So we try to meld those together and put them in a position to where this is your together financial plan, not just one who kind of did it all their lives. And yes, that is a challenge. It's a great question, and I think that's how you got to tackle it.
Well, thank you so much. And I am really looking forward to next Tuesday, the 29th of September at 2 p.m. I hope that you will join us. Bill, thank you so much for just recognizing that caregivers are unique in their situations and bringing that to the forefront on today's session. So thank you everyone for joining us. Again, if you have any questions and they come to you after we finish the session today, please go ahead and email me. And you also see on your screen here how to reach Whichard, Roach, and Bill. And thanks for joining us. Everyone have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Jody.